So if you're new with us this morning, I always feel like I need to say, I'm sorry, I'm not sorry. I'm sorry because I always feel odd when somebody new comes and we're in a capital campaign. It's like you show up at a church and you're like, oh, here we showed up and we have no idea anything about this church, and we show up and all they're doing is talking about money or these plans. And so part of me feels guilty in a sense, but I'm not sorry, because then I kind of check myself. And I realized that the greatest time you could ever learn about a church is if you show up during a capital campaign. You can learn more about who they are, what they believe, what makes them tick in that season than you could showing up at any other season in the life of a church. So I'm not sorry. Welcome. You're going to hear a lot, and I encourage you to come through these weeks, learn about God's story amidst crossings, what we get excited about, and get excited with us. From day zero of this journey of Crossings Community Church, it's always been out there that someday we would move into this ministry home. I remember a conversation that I had with a local pastor. He's still pastoring in the community. This was probably when we as a church were about maybe 8 years old, and we're having a conversation about church vision and all that kind of stuff, talking about those boring things that pastors talk about when they get together. And he makes this comment in passing about another church, and they've got a vision like y'all do, where you're just going to meet in schools or movie theaters forever. And I said, what gave you that idea? That's what we're pursuing, this idea, this vision of forever we're going to meet in schools or a movie theater. And he said, well, y'all are 8 years old, and I haven't heard you really talk about, moving or raising money or anything like that. And I said, well, we've just believed ever since the beginning that God will let us know in His timing what that looks like and when we should leap ahead at that. And so even within the first weeks of beginning to meet as a core group, this was October of 2006. We had a young, single, recent Aggie grad architect. His name was Brian, and he was with us. And he heard me talking about because there was a common question. What is that future facility going to look like? Of course, I was like, I don't know, but this is sort of what I picture in my mind. And I show you guys a slide of what he created in October of 2006. And I pulled this old file up, this CAD drawing that he did this week. And those of you who have been in our new worship space, it just struck me as you look down here at the bottom and you see columns and you see all that, how strikingly similar it is to actually where we will be worshiping here in a few months. But ever since day zero, there's been that vision, and in that drawing, and it was an idea of how can we use space to leverage that space for ministry within the community. How can we use a facility to reach and connect the community? And back then, back in 2005, 2006, there wasn't a coffee shop everywhere. So the thought was, well, if we provide coffee there, people will just come and they'd love to come in there and have coffee because we've got it. Now here in 2019, you can get coffee anywhere on any road within any square mile. It's a bit different day today. But that was the thought back then. But again, it was the motivation of how could we leverage a facility that God might provide to reach into the community. So fall then of 2016, God brought our elders to this place where we said, we believe God is moving us to challenge the church to give. We believe that God's, with a lot of prayer, a lot of conversation. Now's the time to challenge the church, Crossings Community Church, to give towards His vision for that ministry home. And so after a elder retreat then that we went on early in the winter of 2017, working through the details and the hows and the whys and all of the logistics of what that might look like. In March then of 2017, we began a series called Making Room. Vision series, capital campaign leading up to a commitment Sunday that we had on May 7th. I want to read to you some of the words. I'm reading them to you because I want to quote them exactly from what I shared, challenged our church with in that season. I challenged us with these things. One, that we need to ask God to make room in our hearts for those around us who need the gospel. Two, we need to ask God to make room in our faith. Now, when I shared these words, I also said that we are responding to the call of God. We're responding to the call of God amidst church-wide unknowns. You see, the crazy thing is, when we began that, I verbally said, our elders said, it's like, we have no idea where this place is going to be. We have no idea how big it's going to be. We have no idea what the children's space is going to look like. And so we were talking about this vision that God had given, this Abrahamic, like, go west, but I'm not going to tell you what's at that destination. But we were challenging each other in faith to respond to that amidst all kinds of unknowns, and not only church-wide unknowns of all those questions, but personal unknowns. I remember saying that many of those that were gathered in that room, you don't know if you're even still going to live here when we move into that space. You don't know what your financial situation is going to look like. You don't know how that you might be able to give towards this vision and take care of the responsibilities that you have as a family. All kinds of unknowns. However, we know that responding to those unknowns, both the personal unknowns in our own lives and our own stories, and the church-wide unknowns, if we have no idea where it's going to be or what it's going to look like, responding to those unknowns by faith is where the gospel radically changes our lives. Because it demands faith, it demands courage to take a step out forward when you have no idea what you're stepping out into other than God's call. To add to those unknowns, as if it wasn't insane enough, so many memories. Other pastors, I shared this with those of you who are here, other pastors asked me when I told them we were doing that campaign, and they said, well, okay, do you have a drawing of what they're giving money to be able to put up on the screen and give them a visual? He said, no, I don't. I don't even know how to describe to them what they're giving money to, except for God's called us to do it. Crazy, insanity. But as if that wasn't crazy enough, we also said, hey, we believe God's calling us to give towards this ministry home, and also He's called us to multiply and plant a church. Send out one of our own staff members as well as our own families to start a church about 8 miles away. Insane. And it makes no sense to the world aside from it making sense to respond in faithful obedience to that which God calls us to by faith. So at the beginning of that series, Making Room, we extended invitations. I want to mention by name. Invitations to these individuals: David Dominy, Allison McMurtry, Grant Iseminger, David Brown, Kristen Bradford, Matthew Henderson, Paul Hendricks to form a facilities team. That these individuals might come together and again, amidst all the insanity of it, they gathered together. David Dominy was the leader, facilitator of the team. And when I met with him and talked to him the first time, it was the vaguest mission and objective that he could have ever been given. Just go look for all the options you can find. That's what it was. Search for every open door. They looked for land purchases. They looked for buildings that might have been abandoned. They looked for lease space, literally everything. Shopping center, strip center space. They searched and looked for everything. And I remember telling David the same thing that I told that pastor many years ago. We'll know when God provides in his timing. I believe that he'll make it undeniable. So in the fall of 2018, after many months of work by that facility team, a first-time guest walks in. Y'all know the story. Seven Lakes Junior High. First-time guest walks in, and I happen to be standing up in the front when we were meeting over there at Seven Lakes Junior High, and he comes in, and I introduce myself to him and ask the usual questions about he and his family, get to know them a little bit, and begin to share with them a little bit about Crossings Community Church and our vision and where we were going. And I mentioned that capital campaign that had happened, and someday we believe God will provide in his timing a ministry home for us. And he said, I have a friend in the community who would love for a church to use his property. Honestly, I didn't think anything about it. I've heard so many things over the years. I've heard so many. When you're a pastor, you hear all this stuff like, my uncle's on his deathbed and he's got $100 million, and when I inherit $50 million, I'm going to give at least $30 million to the church. Those kind of stories and these things, they come up here and there, and you hear them and you don't really think about them. And so that interaction, I was like, okay, well, that's great. But I connected him then with David, who happened to be up there at the front that day. They exchanged information, and conversations began to develop out of something I thought really that there was nothing there for. Conversations began to happen. He and David, our facilities team, our elders, meetings with all of those groups individually, then all of those groups together, and with him, the property owner. All of these things began to escalate. I remember an email that I sent to the elders. I found it this week as I was searching for some of these exact dates, and it was an email that I said, hey guys, we met this guy on Sunday, and David's reached out to him, and it seems like it's an open door, and I think we should look into it, but I don't think anything will come of it. But I think we've been praying and asking God to provide in his timing his home for Crossings Community Church. Man, it would just be crazy if we didn't explore this open door. And so on Sunday, September 30th, I shared with the church, you guys, those that were here on that Sunday morning, I said something to the effect of, hey guys, God's provided a relationship that's an open door in the community. He's a property owner. And I shared with you, I said, in the eyes of the world, nothing will ever happen. It just doesn't make sense. But we know that our God works in ways that we could never understand or describe. And so I ask you to pray that Sunday. And many of you, of course, asked me for updates after that. Many of you were praying, thankfully. And then, so after 18 months of that making room, giving campaign, after so many prayers, work by that facilities team, our elders, God made it obvious that the opportunity at 1016 FM 1463 was his open door. It was undeniable. It was that moment that I had talked about for 12 years with all the other pastors at all the newcomers' lunches, with all the visitors, when they always ask, well, when are you going to move into a building? When are you going to buy land? And my answer was always, well, I don't know, but I know that God will provide and let us know in his timing with exactly how he wants us to move forward. And he did. He made it undeniable through an amazing story and relationship. And so in December, we celebrated that news together. It was an emotional day for me. not for the reason many of you might think. An emotional day for me, not because that we had longed for this facility for 12 years and all of a sudden we had made it. That's not it. The truth is, it was because it was a landmark on my own faith journey, and I was seeing the landmark that it was on the faith journey of this church. Hebrews chapter 11 begins this way, a familiar verse. I would encourage you to memorize these words. Verse 1, chapter 11. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. And then the rest of chapter 11 is this amazing collection of these moments of faith, these men and women. Amazing, encouraging stories. But it continues after that. And I just want to give you this reminder that those chapter and verse markings that we have, many of you know this, but this chapter and verse markings, the difference between chapter 11 and chapter 12 was not put there by the biblical author. That was added later by people. And so oftentimes what happens is as we read the Bible, we divide those thoughts when they were never intended to be divided. And so follow with me those opening words of chapter 11. Here's what faith is. Here's stories of all of these moments of faith. And then when I pick up reading in 12:1, again, the same line of thought in the same context. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted in your struggle against sin. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Faith is a journey of ascending hilltops. Maybe some of you have seen that picture before or heard it described that way. It's this picture of looking ahead, and you see these ascending hilltops rising into the horizon, and you look forward and you see all those hilltops, but you don't see the valleys that are in between. You don't notice the valleys that are in between until you get up to the next hilltop, and then you look back and you see the distance that you've traveled. Faith is this journey of ascending hilltops, and the Bible teaches us that there are those hilltop moments, but the distance, the valley between those hilltops can be undulating and sometimes violently difficult to navigate. But faith is the journey of traveling that path. The Bible teaches us that faith is formed amidst that journey, amidst that ongoing race. Look at the words. Therefore, let us run the race with endurance. Therefore, because of this definition of faith that I'm going to give you in chapter 11, verse 1, when you look at all the stories of these people and their moments of faith in their life, and you get down there and you say, therefore, let us run that race with endurance. He's saying that faith is not a sprinter's event. It's not a sprinter's event. It's not the 100-meter sprint to salvation. It's not faith. But yet oftentimes that's the way that we think about it. Faith equals that 100-meter sprint that I take in order to get to the finish line of saying, I believe in Jesus, and then I get my get-out-of-hell-free card, I put it in my wallet, and then I'm good to go. It's faith. No, it's not faith. It's not what's being described here. It's not a 200-meter sprint of who should I marry? When should I get married? Not a 400-meter sprint of what should my career be? Should I stay in this job? Should we have kids? How many kids should we have? He says, run the race with endurance. It's ongoing. It's the ultra marathon, if I can make up some words. It's not a destination. It's this race and this journey through these ascending hilltops with the valleys in between. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, this is a horrible illustration. I hate running. Somebody better be chasing me. And even if they are, I'm not going far. Take it up with the author of Hebrews. That's his example. Run the race with endurance. Run. Endurance. It's the process of over time remaining steadfast amidst all the various circumstances. What endurance speaks of. My son, after practice, I think I shared this some weeks ago, but it was a great moment that I won't forget. He hops in the car. They just run a ton at practice. And he hops in the car, and he's pretty fast. He's not the fastest kid, but he's pretty fast. He gets in the car, and he says, Dad, I realized I'm not the fastest kid on the team, but I can run fast for longer than anyone on the team. Endurance. He just realized that I may not be the sprinter, but I can keep going when everyone else gets tired. And that's a call to faith, a life of faith that demands endurance. Faith is this journey of ascending hilltops traveled with our eyes on Jesus. Faith is a journey of ascending hilltops traveled with our eyes set on Jesus. Again, that therefore in 12:1, travel the journey of faith, navigating the obstacles, looking to Jesus. It's looking to Jesus because he's both the model and the means. He's both the model and the means. I was on a phone call. It was either last week or the week before. Time is all jumbled in my head, but trying to figure out where we might connect to water with our new kids ministry building. And the person I was talking to on the other phone, I kind of asked him the question that had been asked to me by somebody who knew how to ask the question. And I asked, this is what's going, where would we find the water? And he tells me, well, over the main line, doohickey is way over here north of this spot, and then there's a cutoff thingy that's over here that you could just tap into, and that'll work fine. And I just stopped him, and I had to say, look, you're going to have to show me what you're talking about because I got no idea what you're saying. I think many of us, when we hear about faith, we hear about the challenge, maybe even that word picture. Faith is this journey of ascending hilltops with our eyes on Jesus. You're saying, what does that look like? You got to show me. Same thing I said to him on the phone. I don't know what those words mean. You got to show me what you're talking about for it to make sense. The author of Hebrews knew that that's what we would be thinking, that's what we would be saying, and so he addresses that. Jesus as the model and the means. In 12:2 and 3 that we already read, Jesus as the model. It says, talking about Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Notice how this word shows up over and over. The joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him. That's what he's saying. Put your eyes on Jesus as you're traveling this journey of faith. Focus your eyes on journey. Focus your eyes on Jesus as you're on the journey. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. Why? So that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. there's the model. What does it look like to travel that journey of faith? You say, well, just look at Jesus. Just look at Jesus, who endured the most difficult valleys that anyone could ever imagine. Took on the worst pain and the worst suffering that anyone could ever imagine. And he did so for the joy set before him, so that you and I today might look at that model and look at that example, respond to him by faith, and then we might not grow weary on our journey of ascending hilltops. The model and the means. His valleys were far deeper anything you and I will ever face, for the joy set before him. Gosh, I hope that blows your mind like it does mine. When you think about the cross, you think about the journey of the cross. We're about to have a Good Friday worship gathering, and I'm looking forward to us just looking and thinking about the realities of the cross that Friday evening. But as you look ahead right now, where you are, and you think about what Jesus took on the cross, not only the physical pain and suffering, but also exponentially worse than any physical pain and suffering was the wrath of an almighty God. All of that endured. Why? For the joy that was set before him. And what joy was that? That you and I, those of us who have placed our faith in him, those of us who have looked at that cross and said, he paid the price that I deserve to pay. That punishment, that pain, was pain that I should have felt. He took it for me. He took on the grave for me. Those of us who look at that and believe in that rescue, he did it so that we may not grow weary in our journey of faith. So that you and I, as we're traveling forward and we're looking at him as the model, that he also becomes the means as well. His journey secured our faith journey of ascending hilltops. His faith journey, what's described there in the Gospels, secured it. It's our means. It makes it possible for us to walk this journey of faith. I love the way Peterson puts it. He says, this faith is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. Under everything. Jesus, he's our model of endurance. He's our means of faith. When we read verse 2 of chapter 11, there's a word in there that I think we quickly read over, and maybe even because it's a word that we don't often use in everyday language today, we miss it. That's when the author of Hebrews uses that word commendation. Commendation. This is how, or by faith, he's saying, they received their commendation. That word is a testimony. It's their story that was placed before God. In other words, as we read chapter 11 and we see what's being said here, its faith was the one most important word that characterized their lives for eternity. Faith. What was Abraham's story? Faith. Every one of them. What was their story? One word. It was the one word that characterized their entire lives for eternity. What word is going to characterize your life for eternity? Maybe the harder question, and some of us would quickly say, right, we know the Jesus answer. My life is going to be characterized by Jesus. My life is going to be characterized by faith. But let's stop for a minute and realize that the one word is already being displayed throughout our lives, regardless of what might cross our lips. See, this week, a lot of soccer stories this morning, but this week I'm sitting on the sidelines and I'm watching the coach, and he calls the boys over, 10 and 11-year-old boys over to him, and he's watched film of the team that they're going to play, that they played yesterday, and it's kind of a rival team for them. Some of them are friends, and it's a local rival organization, and so he's coaching them on this one moment, right? Long story short, this goalie likes to trick the defense, acts like he's going to play the ball one direction, but then switches, taking advantage of a shifted defense. And so the coach is teaching them, and he's talking to them. Here's what you do. I want you to watch, and I want you to do it this way, and watch this. And he does what any good coach would do, and he simplifies it down into one simple thing. And he repeats that one simple thing for 15 or 20 minutes. This is what I want you to watch, right here, this one thing. This is what I want you focused on, this one thing. And then, of course, he asks the question after that 15 or 20 minutes. Okay, boys, what's the one thing you should be focused on? And those of you who have parented 10 and 11-year-old boys, you probably know what happened. Every answer you could probably imagine and more, except for the one that he had just repeated. I mean, there was all kinds of crazy answers being thrown out, some that have absolutely nothing to do with soccer. They were just throwing them out. You see, whether or not we know the right answer, yeah, my life should be characterized by the word faith. That should be my story. Our lives that we're living are throwing out all kinds of other words. And for some of us, maybe it's money, and you're thinking in your mind that that's the one word that's going to characterize my life, because that's the one word that puts food on the table and keeps a roof on my family's head. Maybe for some of you, success. It's success. If an outsider looks at your life and watches the screenplay in front of them, they're going to say the one word that characterizes their story is success. And maybe we're thinking that, well, yeah, because that also will then provide for my family and give them a good example to follow. Maybe some of you, kindness or goodness. Kindness or goodness, so that people will see me and they will feel better about themselves. So that my children will grow up learning how to be good people. Some, the answer may be religion. I want to be a person who's good and does what God says. I want to raise my children to be good people. You see, there is only one word that can possibly characterize our lives for eternity. And that's faith. You see, none of those other words exist without faith. Money, success, being the parenting grand national champion of the world, being religious for the sake of religion. All of that stuff is temporal. In eternity, it doesn't exist. It's worthless. There's no value whatsoever without the foundation of faith, because faith is the only thing that carries us from today into eternity. The journey of ascending hilltops traveled with our eyes on Jesus. To stand before you in December, when I shared that news, 12 years, and we are. God's provided the open door that we had talked about for all these years and that we had waited for. To share that news with you, and then in January for us to gather together and right here send out Chris Kipp, our staff member, and those other families, Nances, Lamberts, and the rest that were gathered up here, and send them out to plant a church. Those are emotional days, not because they were a destination, but because as I got to those moments, I looked ahead and I saw that here's a hilltop, and I looked ahead knowing that the journey of faith for me as Matt Powell and for us as Crossings Community Church was a journey of continuing ascending hilltops with our eyes on Jesus. That was just one. Wasn't the end, wasn't the finish line. It was just the journey. It was the journey of moving forward. And those hilltop moments are those moments, those divine moments where the Heavenly Father reaches down and he puts his hand on your back and he says, you're doing good. Keep believing. There's so much more to come. That's what those hilltops are. God's saying, you're doing great. Keep going. There's so much more to come. Keep believing. So by his grace, he provides these hilltops as we're journeying. Divine pat on the back to say, keep going. There's so much more I have for you. Keep your eyes on Jesus as we move on that journey of faith, being transformed by a deepening and growing faith. You see, he is always faithful. Always. He is always faithful, and he's always inviting us into a deeper faith. He is always faithful, and he's always inviting us into a deeper faith. There's not a destination there until Jesus returns. This moment in time where we planted a church, and we had talked about it, and we had worked towards that. It wasn't a destination. That was God inviting us then to take the next step of jumping in deeper into an even greater faith than what we had had before. You see, today, where we are, this spot, this city on a hill series, vision series, capital campaign, call it whatever you want. In one word summed up, it's a call to faith. That's what it is. Faith. It's an invitation to a growing faith. Faith to be the salt and light that we talked about last week. Faith to be the salt and light in our community, to step out courageously, to communicate the authenticity of the gospel and what it's done in our lives with those around us. You see, if you and I have been rescued by the gospel, we have a story of hope. Hope amidst death. Joy amidst suffering. Purpose amidst being lost. Being salt and light is sharing that radical story with those around us. City on a hill, it's a call to faith to be the church that is undeniable. An undeniable city on a hill, on display in relationships and authenticity. Faith to step forward in leadership and servanthood and presence. As I said the words, I wanted to be as explicit as I could possibly be last Sunday when I said, we need your help. It's an invitation to faith. Faith to give financially, worshipfully, sacrificially, out of that which God has so graciously given to us. To call to faith. And you see on April 14th, that first call to action to you as a church, for us to pursue that moment, purchasing this lease opportunity that God has given us. It's a call to faith. It's a call on the faith journey of ascending hilltops for Crossings Community Church with our eyes on Jesus. So as we close this morning, before I pray, I just want to say these words over us. I just want to verbalize my prayer to you. And that's, may we be a people, it's plural, a church. May we be a people at Crossings Community Church who run this race with endurance, this race of faith, with our eyes on Jesus. This city on a hill, there's so many ways that Satan would like to distract, so many ways that he'd like to take your attention, take our attention, and take it every other way except for focused on him and worshiping him, and that we would fight that with every ounce of strength that he's provided us. So you bow your heads and close your eyes with me. as I pray, I just want to remind you that these tables that we have up here, communion tables, the bread represents Jesus' body that was broken for you. His cup represents his blood that was shed for you. And the scripture says that when we walk up to these tables, we're proclaiming his death until he comes. It's a proclamation of faith. And so this morning, before you rush up, as a believer in Jesus, just encourage you to take a moment, take a deep breath. Ask yourself the question, what's the one word that's going to characterize my story for eternity? Father, I pray this morning that as a church, city on a hill, Father, it's your word. It's not ours. It's not a brand that we made up. Those are your words that you used about your church. And so, Father, I ask that we together, Crossings Community Church, the church that you created, that you formed, that you gave vision to, Father, and that you've provided this ministry home to, God, we would be your church that responds by faith in all that we do. God, in worship as we sing, as we proclaim, in worship as we give financially, in worship as we are salt and light and we courageously share your gospel with those around us, that we would be a people, homes, and a church marked by faith. And God, I pray for those in this room that right now, if they look at that journey of ascending hilltops, they would say that I'm in the deepest part of the valley today. Father, I pray that your presence, the work of your Son on the cross, the provision of your church, Father, would be the outstretched arm to anyone in this room who feels that way. And God, by your grace, that they would journey ahead up the next hill to feel your divine pat on the back, Father, so that we can all continue running ahead, keeping our eyes on you, being transformed by you because of your grace. Father, we need you. I ask that you would work in our hearts this morning. God, if there's anyone in here who hasn't placed their faith in you, I ask that you would open their eyes to the beauty of the cross, the beauty of your victory over the grave. And Father, the courage to be able to get up and respond, to be able to grab somebody around them and ask the questions so that they too could begin journeying through this life of faith. Father, we need you.